The email arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning while I sat at my kitchen table, warming my hands around a mug of chamomile tea. I'd been awake since 4 a.m. Insomnia had become my constant companion these days. The soft ping of my phone momentarily disrupted the gentle patter of raindrops against my window. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. When I saw my daughter Jessica's name in my inbox, my heart leapt with hope, only to crash moments later as I read her words. Mom, Michael and I have decided it's best if you don't attend Emma's birthday party next weekend. We're keeping it small, this year. Just immediate family and a few of Michael's colleagues. I know you'll understand. We'll send pictures. I stared at those cold, dismissive lines until they blurred before my eyes. Immediate family. As if I, her mother, somehow didn't qualify. As if the grandmother to her children, 7-year-old Emma and 4-year-old Noah, was merely an afterthought. Someone to be appeased with digital photos rather than included in precious milestones. What hurt most wasn't just missing Emma's 8th birthday. It was that this marked the 4th family celebration I'd been excluded from in the past year. Thanksgiving at their new house in Oakridge Heights, Christmas morning, Noah's preschool graduation. Each time the excuses grew thinner, more transparent. Each time the distance between us stretched wider. I hadn't always been estranged from my daughter. Far from it. For most of Jessica's childhood, it had been just the two of us against the world. Her father, Daniel, died when she was only 6. A sudden heart attack that left no time for goodbyes, only a mountain of medical bills, and a life insurance policy that barely covered the funeral expenses. Overnight, I transformed from a part-time bookkeeper and full-time mom to the sole provider for our little family of 2. Those early years were a blur of exhaustion and determination. I took on 3 jobs: bookkeeping during the day, waitressing, evenings at Manny's Diner, and weekend shifts at the local convenience store. My hands perpetually smelled of grease and disinfectant. My feet ached constantly. But Jessica never went without the essentials, and many of the extras too. When she needed braces, I picked up additional night shifts. When her class planned a field trip to Washington, D.C., I sold my grandmother's antique silver teapot to cover the cost. For her school supplies, dance lessons, and eventually college tuition, I worked every holiday, sacrificed vacations, and postponed my own dreams, year after year. "You're working again?" Jessica would ask on Christmas mornings, her adolescent voice laced with accusation as I donned my convenience store uniform, ready to earn triple pay for the holiday hours. "Just for a few hours, honey," I'd promise, kissing the top of her head. "Open your presents now, and when I get home, we'll have our special dinner." She couldn't see the bone-deep fatigue that plagued me. She didn't know about the quiet tears I shed in my car between jobs, giving myself exactly 3 minutes to fall apart before pulling myself together again. She couldn't comprehend the constant fear that lived in my chest, fear of unexpected expenses, of illness, of anything that might derail the precarious financial balance I maintained. And I was glad she didn't understand. That was the entire point. Her life was supposed to be easier than mine. The turning point in our relationship came during Jessica's junior year of college. She'd met Michael Harrington, a business major, from a prestigious family, the kind that had generational wealth and connections in all the right places. His parents, Robert and Helen Harrington, owned a successful investment firm with offices in 3 states. Their family vacations involved private jets and Mediterranean villas. Their casual brunches took place at country clubs where the annual membership fee exceeded my yearly income. "Mom," Jessica said during one of her increasingly rare visits. "Home," her voice hushed as if sharing a secret. "When you meet Michael's parents next month, maybe don't mention the diner or the convenience store. Just focus on the bookkeeping business. It sounds more professional." The request stung like a physical blow, but I nodded anyway. Whatever makes you comfortable, sweetheart. That same week, a surprising opportunity arose. Margot Chen, one of my bookkeeping clients who had become something of a mentor over the years, mentioned her nephew was seeking early investors for a financial tech startup. "Sarah," Margot said during our monthly meeting to review her small pottery studio's accounts, "you're the hardest working person I know. You deserve a break. Jacob has a solid business plan, and I'm putting in $15,000 myself. If you could manage even $5,000, it might give you some breathing room down the road." $5,000 might as well have been $5 million to me. But I did have one financial asset, a small life insurance policy my parents had left me when they passed away within months of each other 5 years earlier. I'd been saving that $8,400 for a true emergency. With Jessica nearly through college on scholarships and my own modest savings, perhaps this was the moment to take a calculated risk. I invested every penny of my inheritance. It was terrifying. For 3 years, nothing much happened. The company, SecureShare, grew gradually, developing encryption software for financial institutions. I nearly forgot about my investment too, busy helping Jessica plan her wedding to Michael, a lavish affair where I finally met the impressive Harringtons face to face. Helen and Robert arrived at the rehearsal dinner in matching cashmere sweaters, greeting guests with air kisses and anecdotes about their recent trip to the south of France. Helen surveyed me from head to toe, taking in my department store dress that had required 3 months of careful budgeting. "Jessica mentioned you work in finance?" she asked, her voice dripping with the practiced politeness reserved for those deemed socially inferior. "I'm a bookkeeper," I replied carefully, using the job title Jessica had approved. I didn't mention that I'd grown my client list enough to quit the diner and convenience store 2 years earlier, or that I'd earned my CPA license through night classes. "How quaint," Helen said, her gaze already scanning the room for someone more worth her time. "I suppose that explains why Jessica is so practical about money." Throughout the wedding planning, I was systematically sidelined. The Harringtons insisted on paying for most expenses, something I couldn't compete with, which meant they made most decisions. When I suggested a small local bakery for the wedding cake, Helen laughed lightly and said they'd already secured the patisserie chef from Le Méridien Hotel. When I offered to help address invitations, Robert assured me their calligrapher had it handled. My small list of family friends was mysteriously cut from the guest list when the venue supposedly couldn't accommodate them. At the reception, I found myself seated not at the family table with Jessica and the Harringtons, but at a distant table with distant relatives and friends who seemed equally confused by their placement. When I caught Jessica's eye across the flower-laden ballroom, she quickly looked away, engaged in animated conversation with Helen about their upcoming mother-daughter spa weekend. 2 months after the wedding, I received the call that changed everything. SecureShare was being acquired by one of the largest financial service providers in the country. My $8,400 investment was suddenly worth just over $2 million. I nearly collapsed in my kitchen, gripping my phone as the investment advisor explained my options. I could cash out entirely or convert some shares to the parent company with potential for further growth. "What would you do?" I asked, my voice trembling. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Honestly, if it were me, I'd keep 70% in cash and convert 30% to shares in the parent company. Their growth trajectory is impressive. I followed his advice, and over the next 4 years, those converted shares tripled in value. By the time Jessica gave birth to Emma, my first grandchild, my net worth had quietly grown to nearly $5 million. But I told no one, not even Jessica. Why? At first, it was simple fear, the kind that comes from decades of financial insecurity. I needed to be absolutely certain the money was real and stable before making any changes to my lifestyle. Then, It was observation. I noticed how Jessica and Michael had begun to distance themselves once they became established in their careers. The Harringtons had helped them purchase a beautiful home in Oakridge Heights, an exclusive neighborhood I could never have afforded on my bookkeeper's salary. Michael had joined his father-in-law's investment firm. Their lives were increasingly entangled with the Harringtons' wealthy social circle. Meanwhile, my invitations to Sunday dinners became less frequent. "We're just so busy, Mom," Jessica would say with a sigh whenever I called. "Maybe next month." My offers to babysit were politely declined. "Actually, Helen's taking Emma for the day. She has that huge playroom set up at their house, you know?" I started testing the waters, mentioning minor financial concerns to see how they'd react. "The bookkeeping business might be slowing down," I said during a rare lunch with Jessica shortly after Noah was born. "I'm a little worried about retirement." "Mom, you should have planned better," Jessica replied with poorly disguised irritation. "Michael says everyone should have at least a year of living expenses saved by your age. Have you considered downsizing from your condo?" There was no offer of help, not even temporary support, just judgment from my daughter who had never experienced true financial hardship thanks to my sacrifices. When I asked if I could help with childcare after Noah was born, Jessica explained that Helen would be watching both children 3 days a week. She has so much experience with kids from all her charity work with children's organizations. And you know, their house has that amazing playroom and the backyard with the treehouse. The message couldn't have been clearer. I wasn't good enough. My modest 2-bedroom condo, my practical Honda, my bargain store clothes, all markers of a life Jessica now found embarrassing rather than admirable. Finally, I made a decision. I wouldn't tell Jessica about my newfound wealth, not yet. Instead, I would quietly reshape my life and see if she even noticed. I first retired from active bookkeeping, telling Jessica I'd found a better opportunity, consulting for a friend's accounting firm. I sold my condo and purchased a lovely garden home in a desirable neighborhood, explaining I'd gotten a great deal because it needed cosmetic updates. I replaced my 8-year-old Honda with a new Volvo, not flashy but decidedly upscale. I began wearing better quality clothes, though nothing with obvious designer labels. Jessica barely registered any of these changes. She was too absorbed in her own life, her own social ascent into the world the Harringtons occupied. Our calls grew shorter, her excuses more elaborate. Emma started calling Helen Gamma, while I became the more formal grandmother Sarah. Noah barely knew me at all. Then came my 60th birthday, 3 years after my investment windfall. After decades of putting everyone else first, I decided to give myself a gift that would change everything. After careful research and consultation with financial advisors, I established 2 significant trust funds, one for Emma and one for Noah, each seeded with $250,000 specifically earmarked for their college education and early adult expenses. The trusts were structured meticulously. I was the primary trustee, with provisions for a professional co-trustee from Westridge Financial to manage the investments until the children reached college age. The funds would cover undergraduate and graduate education at any institution they chose, with additional provisions for first home purchases, wedding expenses, or business startup costs after age 30. If they didn't need the money for education, it would remain invested until these later life milestones. Most importantly, I included specific conditions regarding family relationships. The children could only access these funds if they maintained regular contact with me, at least monthly visits or video calls, from age 10 onward. I wasn't using money to buy their affection. I was ensuring they couldn't be completely separated from me by Jessica and the Harringtons' influence. The day after establishing these trusts, I received Jessica's email about Emma's birthday party, the 4th family gathering from which I'd been excluded. As I sat staring at her dismissive message, something shifted inside me. The hurt remained, but alongside it grew a quiet determination. If Jessica wanted to deny me a relationship with my grandchildren, I would ensure they at least had the security I could provide. And perhaps, when they were old enough to understand, they would choose to know the grandmother who had looked out for their future, even when pushed to the margins of their lives. I set my teacup down and began to type my response. Not the hurt, pleading message my heart wanted to send, but something different, something that would set in motion events Jessica could never anticipate. I understand, Jessica. I hope Emma has a wonderful birthday. I've sent a small gift via courier that should arrive Friday. Perhaps we could arrange a lunch, just the two of us, sometime next week. There's something important about Emma and Noah's future I'd like to discuss with you. I hit send, knowing this was only the beginning. What Jessica didn't realize, what Helen and Robert Harrington couldn't possibly suspect, was that their carefully constructed social hierarchy was about to be challenged in ways none of them could imagine. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I believed my grandchildren deserved to know the truth about family, about sacrifice, and about the grandmother who had never stopped loving them, even when pushed into the shadows. The courier would deliver not just Emma's birthday gift, a delicate silver charm bracelet with a book charm representing our shared love of stories, but also formal notification of the trust fund's establishment. Jessica would soon discover that the mother she had deemed unsophisticated and financially naive had quietly secured her children's future in ways the Harringtons, for all their wealth and connections, had never thought to do. What happened next would change our family forever, though not in the ways any of us might have expected. My journey from excluded grandmother to pivotal family figure was just beginning, and the lessons it would teach all of us about love, forgiveness, and the true meaning of family would prove more valuable than any trust fund could ever be. I hadn't expected Jessica to call me so quickly after receiving my email. Yet here I was, the very next morning, watching my phone vibrate across my kitchen counter, her name flashing on the screen. I took a deep breath before answering, steeling myself for whatever was coming. "Mom," her voice was tight, controlled. "I just received some paperwork from Westridge Financial about trust funds for Emma and Noah." "Yes," I replied calmly, stirring honey into my morning tea. "That's what I wanted to discuss with you. You set up trust funds for my children without consulting me?" The forced composure in her tone was already cracking. $250,000 each? Where did you even get that kind of money? It was a fair question. As far as Jessica knew, I'd spent my entire adult life living paycheck to paycheck, scraping together just enough to keep us afloat. The idea that I could casually set aside $500,000 for my grandchildren would seem impossible, perhaps even suspicious. "I made an investment a few years ago," I explained, keeping my voice steady. "It did well. Very well, actually. I wanted to do something meaningful with part of it, and ensuring Emma and Noah's education seemed like the perfect choice." Silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken questions. Then, "I need to see you. Today. Can you meet me at Riverside Park at noon? By the duck pond?" I agreed, sensing she wanted neutral territory for what would undoubtedly be a difficult conversation. Not her home, where Helen might drop by unannounced. Not my garden home, which she hadn't bothered to visit since I'd moved in 8 months earlier. The park represented middle ground, public enough to keep emotions in check, private enough for honesty. As I dressed for our meeting, I considered my approach carefully. This wasn't about flaunting my unexpected wealth or punishing Jessica for pushing me aside. It was about reclaiming my place in my grandchildren's lives while ensuring their future, security. The trust funds were both a gift and a statement. I might have been excluded from family gatherings, but I refused to be erased completely. Riverside Park was vibrant with early summer activity when I arrived. Children chased each other across the playground while parents chatted on nearby benches. Joggers circled the walking path. Elderly couples fed crusts of bread to the eager ducks despite the "do not feed wildlife" signs. I spotted Jessica immediately, perched tensely on a bench overlooking the pond, a manila envelope clutched in her hands. She looked so much like me at that age. The same chestnut hair, though hers was professionally highlighted, the same determined chin, the same slight furrow between her brows when troubled. Yet everything else about her screamed Harrington. Influence, the designer sundress, the artfully casual diamond studs, the perfectly manicured nails. Even the way she sat, spine straight, ankles crossed, reminded me of Helen's country club posture. "Jessica," I greeted her, settling beside her on the bench. "Thank you for meeting me." She turned to face me, her expression a complex mixture of confusion, suspicion, and something else, perhaps a grudging curiosity. Without preamble, she opened the envelope and removed the trust documentation. "What is this really about, Mom?" she asked, tapping the papers with one finger. "You can't possibly have this kind of money. And these conditions about requiring the kids to maintain contact with you. It feels manipulative." I gazed out at the pond, gathering my thoughts. When was the last time I saw Noah? His birthday was 3 months ago, and I wasn't invited to his party. I've seen Emma twice this year, both times by coincidence when I happened to run into you at Carter's grocery. My own grandchildren are being systematically removed from my life, Jessica. Tell me that isn't happening. Jessica's cheeks flushed. "We've been busy. Michael's firm is expanding. Emma started competitive gymnastics, and you know how involved Helen and Robert are with the children." "That's exactly my point," I interrupted gently. "The Harringtons are involved. I am not allowed to be. There's a difference." She stared at her hands, perfectly manicured nails picking at the edge of the envelope. "It's complicated." "Explain it to me then," I said. "Help me understand why I've become an afterthought in your life, why my grandchildren barely know me." Jessica sighed heavily. "You don't fit, Mom. You don't belong in our world. I don't mean that cruelly, but it's the truth. Helen and Robert have connections, influence. Their friends include state senators and CEOs. The life we're building requires consistency. When Emma or Noah mention that their other grandmother lives in a condo and drives a Honda, I drive a Volvo now," I pointed out mildly. "And I sold the condo 8 months ago. My garden home is actually in Westridge, just 10 minutes from you." She blinked in surprise. "Since when?" "That's my point, Jessica. You haven't noticed these changes because you haven't been paying attention to my life. Just as you apparently haven't noticed that I'm no longer actively bookkeeping or that I've started taking photography classes at the Arts Center." Jessica's expression shifted from defensive to confused. "You retired? How are you supporting yourself? And how on earth did you afford Westridge? Those homes start at $500,000. I smiled slightly. As I said, an investment paid off. Quite well, actually. "What investment?" Her voice had taken on a sharper edge. "Why wouldn't you tell me about something like that?" The irony of her indignation wasn't lost on me. "When would I have told you, Jessica? During one of our 15-minute phone calls every few weeks? During a family dinner I wasn't invited to? Or perhaps during Emma's birthday party this weekend, which I'm apparently not welcome to attend?" Her face flushed deeper. "That's not fair." "No," I agreed. "It isn't fair. None of this is fair. Not to me, and certainly not to Emma and Noah, who deserve to know their grandmother. Their only biological grandmother, I might add, since Michael's mother passed away before you met him." Jessica's eyes widened, and I realized I'd struck a nerve. For all Helen Harrington's performance as the perfect grandmother, she wasn't actually related to my grandchildren by blood. She was Michael's stepmother, having married Robert after Michael's mother died of cancer when he was 12. Not that blood connection was everything, but it highlighted the absurdity of pushing me, Emma and Noah's only living grandmother, to the periphery of their lives. "Let's get back to these trust funds," Jessica said, clearly wanting to change the subject. Even if I believe you suddenly came into money, why would you do this without discussing it with Michael and me? We have our own college savings plans for the children. Do you? I asked mildly. That's wonderful. They'll be doubly prepared for whatever educational path they choose. That's not the point. Jessica's frustration was mounting. The point is, you made a major financial decision affecting my children without consulting me. Just as you've made major family decisions affecting my grandchildren without consulting me, I countered. How is excluding me from Noah's birthday party any different? Both are unilateral decisions made by one family member that impact another's relationship with the children. We sat in tense silence, the sounds of playing children and quacking ducks filling the space between us. Finally, Jessica spoke, her voice quieter now. What exactly do you want, Mom? It was the question I'd been waiting for. I want to be part of my grandchildren's lives in a meaningful way. Not as an occasional visitor, not as an afterthought, but as their grandmother who loves them. I want regular time with them, weekly dinners perhaps. I want to be included in family celebrations. I want them to know me, and I want to know them. Jessica seemed to be processing this, her lawyer husband's analytical influence evident in how she weighed her next words. And if we agree to this, would you remove these contact conditions from the trust funds? I hadn't expected such a direct negotiation, though perhaps I should have. Jessica had grown up watching me calculate every penny, every decision weighed against our limited resources. Now she was applying that same cost-benefit analysis to our relationship. What would she have to concede to gain control of the trust? Funds? No, I said firmly. The trust conditions remain. They're not unreasonable. Monthly contact from age 10 is hardly excessive. But this isn't a transaction, Jessica. I'm not buying access to my grandchildren. I'm ensuring they have financial security while maintaining a connection that should exist regardless of money. You can't just force your way back into our lives with financial manipulation, she said, though her tone lacked conviction. Is that what you think I'm doing? After everything I sacrificed to give you opportunities, after working 3 jobs so you could take dance lessons and go on field trips and attend college without crushing debt, you think I'm trying to manipulate you? Jessica had the grace to look ashamed. I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it then? I asked, genuinely curious. Because from where I sit, I spent decades putting your needs first. Now, the moment I do something for myself, and for my grandchildren's future, I'm accused of manipulation. She didn't have an immediate answer for that. We sat watching a mother duck lead her ducklings in a meandering path across the pond, the little ones struggling occasionally to keep up, but never straying too far from their mother's watchful guidance. How much money do you actually have? Jessica finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to keep that information private, not out of spite, but because I feared it would fundamentally change how Jessica saw me. Would knowing my net worth suddenly make me worthy of inclusion in her life? What would that say about our relationship? Yet withholding the information now felt disingenuous. I'd initiated this confrontation. Honesty was the only path forward. My net worth is currently just over $3 million, I said quietly. Jessica's sharp intake of breath was audible. $3 million? How? When? Remember Margot Chen, my client with the pottery studio? About 7 years ago, she suggested I invest in her nephew's financial tech startup. I put in the insurance, money from my parents, about $8,000. When the company was acquired 4 years ago, that investment multiplied significantly. I've made some additional prudent investments since then. 7 years, Jessica repeated slowly. You've been wealthy for 4 years. And you never told me? Would it have mattered? I asked directly. Would knowing I had money have changed how you treated me? Because if so, that's a painful realization. Jessica stared at her hands. That's not fair. Perhaps not, but it's an honest question. A group of children ran past our bench, laughing as they chased a bouncing ball. I watched them, thinking of Emma and Noah, wondering if they were having fun at whatever scheduled activity Helen had undoubtedly arranged for them today. I need time to process this, Jessica finally said, and I need to talk to Michael. Of course, I agreed, but Emma's birthday party is this weekend. I'd like to be there, not to make a scene or to announce anything about the trust funds, but simply to celebrate my granddaughter turning 8. Jessica hesitated, then nodded slightly. Fine, it's Saturday at 2 at our house. It wasn't exactly a warm invitation, but it was a start. As we stood to leave, Jessica paused, studying me with new eyes. You look different, she observed. Not just the clothes or the car. You seem, I don't know, lighter somehow. I smiled. Financial security does that. So does standing up for yourself. We parted with an awkward hug, both of us aware that something fundamental had shifted between us. The carefully constructed narrative Jessica had built of her successful escape from modest beginnings, of her mother perpetually struggling while she ascended into the Harringtons' world, had been disrupted. I was no longer simply Sarah the bookkeeper, forever pinching pennies. I was Sarah with options, Sarah with resources, Sarah who could establish substantial trust funds for her grandchildren without blinking. As I drove home, I wondered what Jessica would tell Michael, and more importantly, what they would tell the Harringtons. Would Robert and Helen view my financial independence as a threat to their influence? Would they counsel Jessica and Michael to contest the trust funds or find legal loopholes around the contact conditions? Or would they recognize that their grandchildren could benefit from having another loving adult in their lives, regardless of social standing or bank balances? I spent the next few days preparing for Emma's birthday party. I selected a special gift. A beautiful illustrated collection of classic children's stories that had been Emma's mother's favorite when she was young, inscribed with a simple message. For Emma, with love from Grandma Sarah. May these stories bring you as much joy as they brought your mother. The book was accompanied by a small silver bookmark with a butterfly charm, an emblem of transformation that felt especially appropriate. When Saturday arrived, I dressed carefully in a simple but elegant navy dress that I'd purchased during a shopping trip to Boston the previous month. Not flashy, not trying too hard, but certainly a step up from the discount store clothes Jessica was accustomed to seeing me wear. I styled my silver-streaked hair in loose waves rather than my usual practical bob. Small pearl earrings, a touch of lipstick, comfortable but stylish flats. I wanted to look put together without appearing to compete with Helen's inevitable designer outfit. The Harringtons' influence was evident the moment I pulled into Jessica and Michael's driveway. Luxury vehicles lined the street. Apparently, keeping it small still included quite a gathering. A professionally printed banner reading, "Happy 8th birthday, Emma," hung across the front of the house. Tasteful balloon bouquets in pastel pink and silver flanked the front door. This was hardly the intimate family gathering Jessica had described when excluding me just days earlier. Jessica answered my knock, her expression a mixture of resignation and nervousness. "Mom, you're right on time." "I brought something for Emma," I said, holding out the carefully wrapped package. "Nothing extravagant, just something meaningful." Jessica accepted the gift with a nod. "Everyone's in the backyard. We have a petting zoo set up." A petting zoo for a small family gathering. I wondered if this had been Helen's idea, or if Jessica and Michael had arranged it before deciding to exclude me from the original guest list. I followed Jessica through the house, a stunning colonial revival with hardwood floors and crown molding throughout, to the expansive backyard where the celebration was in full swing. A white tent had been erected over a portion of the flagstone patio, under which elegant tables were set with what appeared to be actual china and silver rather than paper plates. In a cordoned area of the lawn, children gathered around small enclosures containing rabbits, ducklings, and a miniature pony. A photographer circulated, capturing candid moments of the festivities. And there, holding court near a table laden with beautifully wrapped gifts, stood Helen and Robert Harrington, both dressed as if for a country club luncheon rather than a child's birthday party. Helen's ash blonde hair was perfectly coiffed, her linen dress likely costing more than I used to make in a month at the convenience store. Robert stood beside her in pressed khakis and a pastel button-down, laughing at something another guest had said. I spotted Emma immediately, distinctive in a frilly pink dress, her dark hair pulled back in a French braid that I suspected was Helen's handiwork. She was leading a smaller child. Noah, I realized with a pang, noticing how much he'd grown since I'd last seen him, toward the rabbit enclosure. My grandchildren, so precious and yet so distant from me. Jessica hesitated beside me, clearly uncertain about how to introduce me to the gathering. Before she could decide, Helen spotted us and made her way over, her practiced smile firmly in place. Sarah, she greeted me with air kisses that didn't come close to my cheeks. What a surprise to see you here. Jessica mentioned they were keeping this celebration intimate. The subtle emphasis on intimate made her meaning clear. I wasn't part of the inner circle, the trusted few. I was an outsider, permitted entry as an exception rather than an expected guest. Hello, Helen, I replied pleasantly. I wouldn't miss my granddaughter's birthday. The petting zoo is a lovely touch. Emma seems to be enjoying it. Helen's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Robert's idea, actually. He arranged it through his connections at the Westridge Country Club. They do these charming little animal exhibitions for the children's events there. Of course they did, because even a child's birthday party was an opportunity to showcase the Harringtons' social standing and connections. Before Helen could continue, I noticed Emma looking in our direction. Her expression brightened with genuine surprise as she recognized me. She tugged on Noah's hand and hurried toward us, her little brother stumbling along beside her. "Grandmother Sarah!" she called out, using the formal title Jessica had established for me, in contrast to Helen's more familiar Gamma. "You came to my party!" I crouched down to her level, opening my arms for a hug. "Of course I did, sweetheart. Happy birthday!" Emma threw her arms around my neck in an enthusiastic embrace that made my heart swell. "I didn't know you were coming. Mommy said it was just family and Daddy's work friends." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Jessica wince at Emma's innocent revelation. Helen's smile remained fixed, though her eyes had cooled considerably. "Well, I'm family too," I said gently to Emma, then turned my attention to Noah, who was regarding me with shy curiosity. "Hello, Noah. Do you remember me?" He shook his head, half hiding behind his sister. My own grandson, not recognizing me because he'd been kept away for so long. The pain of that moment was sharp, but I kept my smile steady. "That's okay," I assured him. "We can get to know each other again. I'm your grandmother Sarah." "My other Gamma," he said tentatively. "That's right," I confirmed, not bothering to correct his pronunciation. Emma tugged at my hand. "Do you want to see the bunny rabbits? They let us hold them. And there's a pony named Buttercup who eats carrots right from your hand." "I'd love to see the rabbits," I told her, allowing myself to be led away from the tense triangle of Jessica, Helen, and myself. As Emma enthusiastically introduced me to each rabbit, describing their names and personalities in delightful detail, I caught glimpses of the adult dynamics playing out across the yard. Jessica engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation with Helen. Michael joining them, his expression concerned. Robert observing from a distance, ever the strategic businessman assessing a situation before intervening. I deliberately focused on Emma and Noah, determined that this moment at least would be about connecting with my grandchildren rather than navigating adult conflicts. Emma showed me how to properly hold a snow-white rabbit she informed me was named Marshmallow. Noah, gradually warming to my presence, offered me a carrot to feed Buttercup the pony. "Do you like animals, Grandmother Sarah?" Emma asked as she gently stroked the rabbit's ears. "I do," I told her. "When your mom was little, we had a cat named Whiskers who used to sleep at the foot of her bed every night." Emma's eyes widened. "Mommy had a cat? She never told me that. She says we can't have pets because they're too messy and she's allergic," I supplied. "That's funny, because she never had allergies as a child. Whiskers lived with us until your mom went to college." "Did you have other animals?" "Two?" Noah asked, speaking directly to me for the first time, his little face serious. "We had a goldfish named Bubbles for a while," I told him. "And once we found a baby bird that had fallen from its nest. We kept it in a shoebox until it was strong enough to fly away." "Cool," Noah breathed, clearly impressed. For 20 precious minutes, I existed in a bubble with my grandchildren, sharing simple stories about their mother's childhood that they'd apparently never heard. I learned that Emma loved gymnastics, but secretly preferred reading, and that Noah could already count to 100 in both English and Spanish thanks to a preschool teacher he adored. They were bright, curious children with distinct personalities already emerging. Emma thoughtful and determined, Noah observant and cautious. The bubble burst when Helen approached, her hand extended toward the children. "Emma, darling, it's time for cake and presents. Noah, come along with Gamma now." Emma reluctantly returned Marshmallow to his enclosure. "Can Grandmother Sarah sit with us for cake?" Helen's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, dear. Your grandmother is welcome to join everyone for refreshments." The emphasis on everyone made it clear that I was being categorized with the general guests rather than the family inner circle. But Emma seemed satisfied, taking my hand as we walked toward the tent where a magnificent 3-tier cake waited on a central table. Pink, fondant flowers cascaded down one side, and a crown-wearing figure I assumed represented Emma stood atop the confection. As we approached, I noticed the seating arrangement. A head table where Michael, Jessica, Helen, Robert, and the children were clearly meant to sit, with additional round tables for the remaining guests. Emma, still holding my hand, led me directly to the head table. "You can sit next to me, Grandmother Sarah," she announced confidently, pulling out the chair beside hers. A flicker of discomfort crossed Jessica's face as she exchanged glances with Helen. The seating arrangement had obviously been predetermined, and I wasn't part of the plan. Before anyone could object, Robert stepped forward with the smooth diplomacy that had undoubtedly served him well in business. "We'll just add another chair," he said, signaling to a hovering staff member, because of course there was hired staff for this small family gathering. Emma should have both her grandmothers nearby on her special day. Helen's smile remained. Fixed as a server quickly produced another chair, wedging it between Emma's seat and what I suspected had been Helen's intended position. I sat down with quiet dignity, thanking the server with genuine warmth. Emma settled beside me, pleased with the arrangement. What followed was a study in controlled tensions beneath a veneer of celebration. The cake was cut, Emma blew out candles, photographs were taken. Throughout it all, I maintained a pleasant demeanor, complimenting the lovely party, chatting with nearby guests, focusing primarily on Emma and Noah. If the Harringtons wanted to treat me as an unwelcome intruder, that was their prerogative. My priority was reconnecting with my grandchildren. When the time came for presents, Emma opened mine after several boxes containing expensive toys and designer children's clothes. She carefully removed the wrapping paper from my gift, her expression curious as she revealed the book of classic stories. "This was your mother's favorite book when she was your age," I explained as Emma opened the cover to find my inscription. "I used to read these stories to her before bedtime." Emma looked up at me with genuine interest. "You did? Which one was her favorite?" "The Secret Garden," I replied without hesitation. She loved the idea of a hidden place that could be transformed with care and patience. Jessica, seated across the table, stared at me with an unreadable expression. Surprise, perhaps, that I remembered such a detail, or nostalgia for those simpler times when it was just the two of us sharing stories before bed. "Can you read it?" "To me sometime," Emma asked, tracing the illustration on the book's cover with one finger. "I'd love to," I told her, my heart swelling at this simple request. "Anytime you'd like." Helen quickly interjected, "There's one more special present. Emma, from Gamma and Grandpa Robert." Robert produced an elaborately wrapped box from beneath the table. Emma opened it to reveal a child-sized tablet in a pink protective case. "It's your very own iPad," Helen announced triumphantly. "Now you can FaceTime us anytime, play educational games, and watch your favorite shows." The contrast between our gifts couldn't have been more stark. My simple book of timeless stories versus a high-tech device representing the Harringtons' prosperity. Yet Emma clutched both gifts with equal enthusiasm, thanking us with the genuine gratitude of a child who hadn't yet learned to value things based on their price tag. As the party began to wind down, guests departing with professionally assembled goodie bags, I prepared to take my leave as well. I found Jessica in the kitchen, supervising the cleanup staff. "Thank you for letting me come today," I said simply. It meant a lot to me to be here for Emma. Jessica nodded, her expression thoughtful. "She was happy to see you." She kept that book beside her even after opening the iPad. "I meant what I said about reading it to her," I told her. "Anytime you'd like to arrange that." Jessica hesitated, then said, "Maybe you could come for dinner next Friday. Nothing fancy, just family time. You could read to Emma afterward if you'd like." It was a small offering, tentative and carefully bounded, but it represented a potential beginning, a crack in the wall that had been growing between us for years. "I'd like that very much," I said, resisting the urge to make a bigger deal of this minor concession. "Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself," Jessica replied, then added almost reluctantly, "And maybe that photo album from when I was little, the one with the blue fabric cover? Emma's been asking about what I was like as a child." I nodded, surprised and touched by this request. "Of course. I know exactly which one you mean." As I said my goodbyes to Emma and Noah, promising to see them again soon, I caught Helen watching me from across the room, her expression calculating. She approached as I was collecting my purse to leave. "Sarah," she said in a low voice, "I understand you've come into some money recently." So Jessica had told them about the trust funds. I wasn't surprised. "I made a fortunate investment," I replied simply. Helen nodded, her smile not reaching her eyes. "How lovely for you. Robert and I have always believed in financial independence." "Of course. But family dynamics can be so delicate, don't you think? Children need consistency, structure. Too many competing influences can be confusing." The warning was veiled but unmistakable. In Helen's view, I was disrupting a carefully established order, one where she and Robert stood at the top of the family hierarchy, with Jessica and Michael deferring to their wisdom and influence. "You know what I've found, Helen?" I said, pleasantly. "Children are remarkably resilient and intelligent. They're capable of loving many people without ranking them. They don't see love as a competition unless adults teach them to see it that way." Before she could respond, I wished her a pleasant evening and walked out into the fading afternoon light, my heart lighter than it had been in months. The battle for my place in my grandchildren's lives was far from over. Helen and Robert wouldn't easily surrender their dominance, and Jessica and Michael had years of established patterns to overcome. But today, for a few precious hours, I had been Grandmother Sarah again. As I drove home, I thought about the trust funds that had prompted this confrontation. They weren't just financial provisions for Emma and Noah's future. They represented my refusal to be erased from their lives. Whether Jessica and the Harringtons approved or not, I had established a tangible connection to my grandchildren that would endure. What would happen next remained uncertain. Would Jessica follow through on the dinner invitation, or would Helen find a way to intervene? Would Michael resent my financial intrusion into their family planning, or would he recognize the benefits of additional resources for his children's future? And most importantly, would Emma and Noah be allowed to develop genuine relationships with me, independent of adult tensions and power struggles? As I pulled into my driveway, I realized that for the first time in years, I felt hopeful about these questions. The path forward wouldn't be simple or straight, but it had opened before me. And I was ready to walk it with the same determination that had carried me through decades of single parenthood and financial struggles. The message I'd sent with those trust funds was clear. I might have been pushed aside, but I would not be forgotten. And in that quiet act of resistance, I had found not just a way back to my grandchildren, but a new kind of strength within myself. The promised family dinner at Jessica's house arrived more quickly than I'd anticipated. After Emma's birthday party, I half expected a cancellation, perhaps a convenient emergency engineered by Helen or a sudden work commitment for Michael. But Friday morning brought a text from Jessica confirming our plans for 6:30 that evening, along with a casual mention that it would just be the five of us: Jessica, Michael, the children, and me. No Harringtons. A small victory, perhaps. I spent the afternoon carefully preparing. I located the blue photo album Jessica had requested, lingering over images of her childhood, gap-toothed smiles, Halloween costumes I'd sewn by hand, birthday cakes shaped like cartoon characters I'd labored over until the early morning hours. Each photograph represented not just a moment, but a sacrifice. A choice to prioritize her happiness over my own convenience. Not because I was a martyr, but because that's what love had meant to me. Showing up, being present, creating joy even amid struggle. I also brought a small gift for Noah, not wanting him to feel left out while I shared special time with Emma. A children's book about a little boy who builds a backyard fort seemed perfect. Simple enough for a 4-year-old, but with beautiful illustrations that sparked imagination. I wrapped it in blue paper with a silver bow, nothing elaborate but thoughtful. The Westridge neighborhood where Jessica and Michael lived exuded quiet affluence. Large colonial homes set back from pristine streets, mature oak trees providing dappled shade for perfectly manicured lawns. Their house, a stately 4-bedroom with black shutters and a red door, represented everything I'd wanted for Jessica growing up: stability, security, beauty. Yet as I parked my Volvo in their circular driveway, I couldn't help wondering what had been lost in the acquisition of all this perfection. Michael answered the door, his expression neutral but not unwelcoming. "Sarah," he greeted me with a brief nod. "Come in. Jessica's just finishing up in the kitchen." Our relationship had always been cordial but distant. I'd never been quite sure if he actually disliked me or simply absorbed the Harringtons' assessment that I wasn't worth cultivating as more than a peripheral family connection. Today, however, he seemed almost curious, studying me with new interest as I entered their foyer. "Thank you for having me," I said, handing him the bottle of wine I'd brought. Nothing ostentatious, but a respectable vintage I knew paired well with the lasagna Jessica had mentioned they were serving. "Nice choice," he commented, examining the label with what appeared to be genuine appreciation rather than the condescension I'd grown accustomed to. Perhaps the revelation of my changed financial circumstances had altered how he saw me. The thought was both satisfying and sad. The sound of running feet interrupted any further conversation as Emma and Noah barreled into the foyer, their faces bright with excitement that warmed my heart. Had Jessica been encouraging them to look forward to my visit? Or was their enthusiasm simply the natural exuberance of children promised a special evening? "Grandmother Sarah," Emma exclaimed, wrapping her arms around my waist. "Did you bring the book to read? The one with all the stories?" I did, I assured her, returning her hug. And I brought the photo album of your mom when she was little, just like she asked. Noah hovered nearby, shy but curious. I crouched down to his level, meeting his eyes directly. I brought something for you too, Noah. So you wouldn't feel left out while I'm reading to Emma. His eyes widened as I produced the wrapped package from my bag. For me? Really? Really, I confirmed, handing it to him. Every boy needs his own special book. He tore into the wrapping paper with the uninhibited joy only small children can muster, gasping with delight when he saw the fort-building book. Daddy, look, it's boys building a fort. Can we build one too? Michael smiled, a genuine expression that softened his usually reserved features. Sure, buddy. Maybe this weekend we can try. Jessica appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She wore casual clothes, jeans and a simple blouse, rather than the carefully curated outfits I usually saw her in. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she wore minimal makeup. She looked younger this way, more like the daughter I remembered before the Harringtons' influence had polished away her natural warmth. Mom, she greeted me with a quick hug that felt less perfunctory than usual. You're right on time. Dinner's almost ready. I followed the family into their open-concept kitchen and dining area, noting subtle signs that they'd made an effort for my visit. The table was set nicely, though not with the formal china I'd glimpsed at Emma's party. Fresh flowers sat in a simple vase as a centerpiece. The house smelled wonderfully of garlic, tomatoes, and herbs. Can I help with anything? I offered, placing the photo album on a side table. Actually, yes, Jessica said, surprising me. Would you mind tossing the salad while I get the garlic bread out of the oven? The children can help Michael with the drinks. This casual inclusion in dinner preparations felt significant, a small but meaningful shift from being treated as a guest to being treated as family. I took the wooden salad bowl she indicated and began gently mixing the greens with the homemade vinaigrette, watching as Michael helped the children fill water glasses and bring them to the table. So, Michael said as we all settled around the table, Jessica tells me you've done quite well with an investment, Sarah. Tech startup, was it? The directness of his question might have seemed rude from someone else, but Michael was an investment advisor by profession. Financial matters were his natural territory. Yes, I replied, passing the salad to Emma. SecureShare. They developed encryption software for financial institutions. A client's nephew was the founder. Michael nodded thoughtfully. Smart sector to invest in. Financial tech is exploding right now. He paused, then added, Not many people have the instinct to recognize a good opportunity like that, especially with limited capital to start with. Was that respect in his voice? I couldn't be sure, but it sounded less like condescension and more like professional acknowledgement. It was mostly luck, I said modestly, and good timing. Don't sell yourself short, Michael replied, surprising me further. Luck favors the prepared. You saw potential where others might not have. Jessica glanced between us, her expression unreadable. Then she deliberately changed the subject, asking Emma about her day at school. The conversation shifted to more neutral territory. Emma's upcoming science project, Noah's preschool finger painting masterpiece, a funny story about their neighbor's escaped hamster. Throughout dinner, I noticed subtle differences in how Jessica and Michael interacted with me. Questions about my life, my recent activities, my new home in Westridge, small inclusions that had been absent from our interactions for years. Was it the revelation of my financial situation that had prompted this change? The trust funds I'd established? Or something deeper? Perhaps Jessica reflecting on our relationship after our conversation in the park. After dinner, as Michael cleared plates with the children's help, Jessica poured us each a glass of wine and nodded toward the living room. I thought maybe we could look at those old photos before the kids' bedtime. Emma's been asking about what I was like at her age. We settled on the comfortable sectional sofa, Jessica beside me, closer than she typically positioned herself. I opened the blue album, and memories spilled out across our laps in glossy 4x6 rectangles. "Oh my goodness," Jessica laughed, pointing to a photo of herself at about 7, dressed in a homemade butterfly costume with wire hanger wings covered in purple cellophane. I remember this. I insisted the wings had to be purple because monarch butterflies were too obvious. "You wore that costume for 3 straight Halloweens," I recalled. "I had to keep modifying it as you grew. By the 3rd year, we were running out of purple cellophane in town." "Mom, you made that?" Emma asked, climbing onto the sofa beside us, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's so pretty." "Grandmother Sarah made all my costumes," Jessica told her, surprising me with this acknowledgement. Store-bought wasn't an option back then. Not an option because we couldn't afford it, though Jessica didn't specify this. But the simple acknowledgement of my efforts meant more than I expected. We turned pages, moving through Jessica's childhood chronologically. Her first bicycle, second-hand but lovingly painted her favorite shade of blue. Her dance recitals in costumes I'd sewn, late into the night after my shifts at the diner. The camping trip to Lake Merrimack, where we'd stayed in the cheapest cabin but had splurged on a boat rental for one magical afternoon. "You took dance lessons too?" Emma asked her mother, clearly delighted by this connection. "Ballet and jazz," Jessica confirmed. "Every Tuesday and Thursday. Grandmother Sarah would pick me up from school and take me directly to Miss Patricia's studio." After arranging my work schedule around those lessons, I silently added, begging for earlier shifts, staying later to compensate, running on 4 hours of sleep some nights to make it all work. Noah, not to be left out, squeezed in beside Emma. "Where was your daddy?" he asked innocently, pointing to a photo of Jessica blowing out birthday candles with only me beside her. A brief silence fell. Jessica and I exchanged glances, and I saw something vulnerable flash across her face. A recognition, perhaps, of the parallel between her childhood with a single mother and her children's life surrounded by 2 sets of grandparents, financial security, and every material advantage. "My daddy died when I was very little," Jessica explained gently. "Even younger than you are now, Noah, so it was just grandmother Sarah and me for a long time." "Were you sad?" Noah asked with a child's directness. Jessica's eyes met mine over the children's heads. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but my mom made sure I was okay. She worked very hard to take care of me and give me everything I needed." It was the most direct acknowledgement of my sacrifices Jessica had offered in years. Something tightened in my chest. Not quite pain, not quite joy, but a complex emotion somewhere in between. The evening progressed with more photos, more stories, more moments of connection. When it was time for the children's bedtime routine, Emma insisted I read to her as promised. Jessica led me to Emma's bedroom, a pink and purple sanctuary filled with books, stuffed animals, and gymnastics. Medals. Noah trailed along, clutching his new fort book, unwilling to be separated from the excitement. "Can Noah listen too?" Emma asked generously as she climbed into bed. "Of course," I agreed, settling into the comfortable chair beside her bed. "Which story would you like first?" "The Secret Garden," Emma said without hesitation. "Mommy," said it was her favorite when she was little. I opened the classic story collection to the right page, but before I began reading, Jessica spoke from the doorway where she'd been watching us. "Actually," she said softly, "would you mind if I stayed and listened too?" Something about her request, tentative, almost wistful, made my throat tighten with emotion. "I'd love that," I replied. Jessica settled on the edge of Emma's bed, and I began reading the tale of Mary Lennox and her discovery of the hidden garden at Misselthwaite Manor. My voice carried the words across years and generations. From the nights I'd read this same story to Jessica in our tiny apartment, to this moment in Emma's beautifully appointed bedroom. Different circumstances, different setting, but the same magic of story weaving connections between us. Noah fell asleep halfway through, curled against Jessica's side. Emma lasted until Mary first entered the secret garden before her eyelids drooped closed. I quietly marked our place in the book and set it on the nightstand. "We can continue tomorrow," I whispered to Jessica as we carefully extracted ourselves from the sleeping children. "If that's all right." She nodded, leading me back to the living room where Michael was working on his laptop. He closed it as we entered, standing with a nod of acknowledgement. "The kids enjoyed having you here," he said, his tone neutral but not unfriendly. "Emma's been talking about those stories since your gift at her party." "They're wonderful children," I replied sincerely. "Thank you for letting me spend this time with them." Jessica walked me to the door, lingering in the foyer as if there were more to say. Finally, she spoke, her voice low to avoid being overheard by Michael. "Helen called 3 times today trying to change our plans for tonight. She suddenly had symphony tickets she wanted to give us, then suggested she could watch the children so we could have a date night." I wasn't surprised by this revelation, but Jessica's decision to share it with me felt significant. "What? Did you tell her?" "That we already had plans," Jessica said simply. Then, with a hint of the determination I remembered from her childhood, she added, "That spending time with you was important to me and the children." The simple statement hung between us, weighted with all that remained unspoken. Years of distance. Helen's careful campaign to minimize my role in her life. Jessica's choices to align herself with the Harringtons' world at the expense of our relationship. "Thank you," I said quietly. "That couldn't have been easy." Jessica shrugged slightly. "It shouldn't be hard to prioritize the children's relationship with their grandmother. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about being systematically excluded from their lives, and about everything you did for me growing up." I waited, sensing there was more she wanted to say. After a moment, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never really thanked you, did I? For all those jobs, all those sacrifices. I just expected it. And then I grew up and somehow convinced myself that the life you'd given me wasn't good enough." "Jessica," I began, but she shook her head. "No, please, let me say this. I've been embarrassed by our background, by the fact that we struggled when I was growing up. I let Helen's opinions become my opinions. I started seeing you through her eyes, as someone who didn't fit into the world I wanted to belong to." Her candor caught me off guard. I'd expected a gradual thawing, not this sudden crack in the ice. "What changed?" I asked gently. She smiled wryly. "Would you believe it was Emma? After your visit to her birthday party, she kept asking questions about you, about what I was like as a little girl. She wanted to know why she didn't see you more often. And I didn't have a good answer, nothing that didn't make me sound shallow and ungrateful." I nodded, understanding the power of seeing ourselves through our children's eyes. Children have a way of cutting through our pretenses. "The trust funds were part of it too," Jessica admitted. "Not the money itself, but what they represented. You were planning for Emma and Noah's future even while being pushed out of their present. It made me question what kind of example I was setting for them. It was more self-awareness than I'd anticipated, and it kindled a cautious hope within me. Not that everything would suddenly be perfect between us, but that there was an opening, a possibility of rebuilding what had been damaged. "Would you like to come for dinner again next Friday?" Jessica asked. "Maybe make it a regular thing? The children would love it, and I'd like the chance to get to know you again. The real you, not the version I've been carrying in my head these past few years." "I'd like that very much," I said simply, restraining myself from showing too much emotion. This fragile reconnection needed space to strengthen, not the weight of years of hurt and expectation. As I drove home that evening, I felt a curious mixture of emotions, hope tempered by realism, joy shadowed by the awareness of how much had been lost. One dinner couldn't erase years of distance. Helen wouldn't simply cede her influence without resistance. Michael's newfound respect, likely influenced by my financial situation, raised its own complicated questions. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was truly Jessica's mother again, not just a peripheral figure to be managed and minimized. And I was Emma and Noah's grandmother, not just in title, but in the beginnings of a genuine relationship, built on stories and shared moments rather than obligatory holiday appearances. The following morning, I received an unexpected call from Robert Harrington. His name on my caller ID gave me pause. In all the years Jessica had been married to Michael, Robert had never once called me directly. Sarah. He greeted me when I answered, his voice carrying its usual measured confidence. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Not at all, I replied cautiously. What can I do for you, Robert? There was a brief pause before he continued. I understand you visited Jessica and the family last night for dinner and story time with the children. The fact that he knew these details meant either Jessica or Michael had shared them, or perhaps Helen had extracted the information. I wondered which was more likely. Yes, I confirmed simply, waiting for him to reveal the purpose of his call. Helen and I were hoping you might join us for lunch today, he said, the invitation so unexpected that for a moment I thought I'd misheard him. There are some family matters we'd like to discuss. The Palmer Club at noon? It's not far from your new home in Westridge, I believe. The Palmer Club was one of the most exclusive establishments in the area, the kind of place where membership was by invitation only, and discussions about money were considered gauche because everyone simply assumed you had plenty of it. It was exactly the kind of setting where the Harringtons would feel comfortable and in control. What kind of family matters? I asked, unwilling to walk into whatever they were planning without some indication of their agenda. Robert's chuckle carried a note of genuine amusement. Direct as always, Sarah. I've always appreciated that about you, even when Helen found it disconcerting. Nothing ominous, I assure you. Just a conversation long overdue regarding the children and, well, the family dynamics moving forward. My instinct was to decline. The Palmer Club represented everything about the Harringtons' world that had contributed to my exclusion from Jessica's life, the emphasis on appearances, connections, and social standing over authentic relationships. But curiosity prevailed. What had prompted this sudden outreach? And more importantly, what might I learn about their intentions regarding my relationship with my daughter and grandchildren? Noon would be fine, I agreed. Should I meet you in the lobby? Perfect, Robert replied smoothly. Looking forward to it, Sarah. As I ended the call, I wondered if I'd just agreed to a peace negotiation or walked into an elegant trap. Either way, I would need to prepare carefully for whatever the Harringtons intended. If they thought my newfound financial security meant I could be easily manipulated or impressed, they would be sorely disappointed. I spent the morning reviewing the trust documents I'd established for Emma and Noah, refreshing my understanding of the specific terms and conditions. If the Harringtons planned to challenge these arrangements legally or pressure me to modify them, I wanted to be fully prepared to defend my decisions. I also made a quick call to my financial advisor, confirming that all the paperwork was in by proper order and the funds were securely established. At 11:45, I arrived at the Palmer Club, a stately brick building with white columns that exuded old money dignity. I'd selected my outfit with deliberate care, a well-tailored pantsuit in deep burgundy that conveyed confidence without ostentation, paired with simple pearl earrings and low heels. Not trying to compete with Helen's designer wardrobe, but not presenting myself as someone easily intimidated either. The uniformed doorman ushered me into a marble-floored lobby where paintings by local artists hung in gilded frames. A young woman at the reception desk smiled professionally when I approached. I'm meeting Robert and Helen Harrington for lunch, I informed her. Her demeanor warmed immediately. Of course, Ms. Reynolds. Mr. and Mrs. Harrington are already seated in the garden room. James will show you the way. A gray-haired server materialized at my elbow, guiding me through the club's hushed interior toward a sun-filled room overlooking perfectly manicured gardens. Robert spotted me first, rising from a corner table set with gleaming silver and crystal. Helen turned, her smile fixed and practiced as she assessed my appearance. "Sarah, welcome," Robert greeted me, pulling out a chair. "Thank you for joining us on such short notice." "Thank you for the invitation," I replied, settling into the offered seat with deliberate poise. It was unexpected. Helen signaled a hovering server who immediately appeared at my elbow. "Sarah will have," she prompted, clearly accustomed to ordering for guests. "Sparkling water with lime for now, thank you," I said directly to the server, politely but firmly establishing that I would speak for myself. Robert watched this small exchange with what appeared to be veiled amusement. Helen's smile never faltered, though something flickered in her eyes. Irritation, perhaps, or recalculation. "We've taken the liberty of ordering the sea bass for lunch," she informed me. "It's the club's specialty, and Robert's absolute favorite." Another small power play, presuming to order my meal without consultation. "Actually," I said pleasantly, "I'd prefer to see a menu. I'm allergic to shellfish, and I'd need to know how the sea bass is prepared." No such allergy existed, but the minor fabrication served its purpose. Helen's carefully constructed script had already been disrupted twice in the first minute of our meeting. Robert's expression shifted to one of genuine curiosity, as if I'd become an interesting puzzle he hadn't quite figured out. "Of course," he said smoothly, signaling the server. "James, please bring Ms. Reynolds a menu." As we waited for the menu, Robert initiated what appeared to be casual conversation. "Jessica mentioned you've moved to Westridge recently. The garden. Homes on Maple Court? Beautiful properties. We looked at one ourselves before deciding on our current residence." "Yes, I'm quite happy there," I replied. "The community is lovely. Close enough to town for convenience, but private enough for peace." "Quite a change from your previous living situation," Helen observed, the comment walking the line between conversational and condescending. "Change is the only constant in life," I replied mildly, something I've always embraced rather than resisted. The server returned with a menu and took my order, the poached salmon with seasonal vegetables, a deliberate choice different from their pre-selected sea bass. Once he departed, I decided to move past the preliminary skirmishes. "You mentioned family matters you wanted to discuss," I prompted, looking directly at Robert. "I'm curious what prompted this sudden interest in my input after years of being quite effectively excluded from family decisions." Helen's perfectly manicured hand tightened almost imperceptibly around her water glass, but Robert nodded as if appreciating my directness. "Recent developments have made us reconsider certain, arrangements," he said carefully. "The trust funds you've established for Emma and Noah, your increased presence in their lives. Jessica's decision to invite you for a family dinner without consultation. These represent significant shifts in the established dynamic." The established dynamic being my systematic marginalization from my daughter and grandchildren's lives? I asked, keeping my tone pleasant despite the pointed question. Helen leaned forward, abandoning pretense. "Sarah, let's be frank. For years, you've been content to remain on the periphery of Jessica and Michael's life, accepting the occasional holiday invitation or brief visit. Suddenly, you reveal substantial financial resources and immediately use them to insert yourself more prominently into the family structure. You must understand our concern." "Actually, Helen, I don't," I replied calmly. "What exactly concerns you? That my grandchildren might benefit from additional educational funds? That my daughter might reconnect with the parent who raised her? Or is it simply that the narrative you've carefully constructed, of Jessica escaping her humble origins to join your world is being disrupted by the revelation that I'm not quite as financially disadvantaged as you've portrayed me. The bluntness of my response clearly caught Helen off guard. She opened her mouth to reply, but Robert raised a hand slightly, a subtle signal I recognized from watching their family interactions over the years. Helen reluctantly deferred to him, another small dynamic I found interesting to observe. "Sarah," Robert said, his voice reasonable and measured, "we have only ever wanted what's best for Jessica, Michael, and the children. The stability, opportunities, and connections we've provided have been given with genuine love and concern for their well-being." "I don't doubt your love for them," I acknowledged, softening my approach slightly. "But I wonder if you've confused what's best for them with what most closely aligns with your values and preferences." Robert studied me with new interest, as if seeing beyond the bookkeeper he'd dismissed for years. "A fair point," he conceded, surprising both Helen and me. "Perhaps we've been overzealous in our guidance at times." Helen's expression suggested this was not the approach they'd planned, but she recovered quickly. "What exactly are your intentions, Sarah? With these trust funds, with these renewed efforts to be part of the children's lives?" The question was direct, and I appreciated that more than their earlier attempts at social niceties. "My intentions are simple. I want a relationship with my daughter and my grandchildren. Not quarterly appearances at carefully orchestrated events, but genuine connection. Regular visits, honest conversations, the chance to know Emma and Noah as they grow." "And the financial aspect?" Robert pressed. "The conditions you've placed on the trust funds regarding continued contact?" So there it was, the real concern. Not just my presence in their lives, but the leverage I'd created through the trust conditions. "The financial provisions exist independently of any personal relationship," I said carefully. "Emma and Noah's educational futures are secured regardless of how Jessica and Michael choose to include or exclude me from family life. The contact conditions simply ensure that when the children are old enough to make their own choices about family relationships, they'll have enough knowledge of me to make informed decisions." Our meals arrived, temporarily pausing the conversation. As we began eating, I noticed Robert exchanging a look with Helen that I couldn't quite interpret. After several bites, he set down his fork and addressed me again. "Sarah, I'm going to be direct. We've invested considerable time, energy, and yes, money in helping Jessica and Michael build the life they have. The schools the children attend, the neighborhood they live in, the social circle they're part of. All of this has been carefully cultivated." I nodded, waiting for him to continue, sensing we were approaching the true purpose of this meeting. "We're not opposed to your having a relationship with the children," he said, surprising me slightly. "But we believe there should be clear parameters, consistency in messaging, alignment in values. You want to make sure I don't contradict or undermine the worldview you've established," I translated, cutting through the careful phrasing. Robert's smile was thin but genuine. "Essentially, yes." "And if I don't agree to these parameters?" I asked. Helen interjected, her voice lower but intense. "Then we would need to reconsider our own financial commitments. The children's private school tuition, the summer programs, the eventual college funds we've established. Jessica and Michael can't afford these things on their own, despite their comfortable income." It was a threat, elegantly phrased but unmistakable. "Conform to our expectations, or we'll withdraw the financial support Jessica and Michael have come to depend on." "I see," I said quietly. "So this is a negotiation. My behavior in exchange for your continued financial involvement. We prefer to think of it as a mutual understanding," Robert corrected smoothly, "for the benefit of the entire family." I took a moment to consider their position, understanding now why they'd invited me to the Palmer Club, their territory, where they felt powerful and in control. The elegant trap had been sprung, with Jessica and the children's lifestyle hanging in the balance. What the Harringtons didn't realize was that they'd miscalculated badly. They assumed that because I now had money, I thought like them, that I viewed relationships and family as assets to be leveraged, controlled, and negotiated. They believed my trust funds were about buying influence, just as their financial support of Jessica and Michael had always come with invisible strings attached. I set down my fork, meeting Robert's gaze directly. I appreciate your candor, Robert, and I understand your position clearly, but I think you've misunderstood something fundamental about me. And what's that? Helen asked, her tone suggesting she doubted I could surprise her. I don't use money to control the people I love, I said simply. I never have, even when I had almost nothing. The trust funds I established for Emma and Noah come with minimal conditions, because I want them to have security and opportunity, regardless of adult conflicts or power struggles. That's what love looks like to me, giving without demanding compliance. In return. Robert's expression remained impassive, but I sensed he was listening carefully. Helen's lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. If you withdraw your financial support from Jessica and Michael to punish them for including me in their lives, I continued, you'll be revealing exactly what that support has always been about. Control, not love. I wonder if that's really the message you want to send your son and grandchildren. For the first time, I saw genuine uncertainty flicker across Robert's face. Helen remained unmoved, but I hadn't expected to reach her. Robert, however, was a businessman first, practical, strategic, and capable of recognizing when his position had been unexpectedly weakened. What do you propose instead? He asked finally. No proposals, no negotiated terms, no parameters, I replied. Just a family finding its way forward with honesty and mutual respect. Jessica is an adult capable of making her own decisions about relationships. Emma and Noah deserve connection with all the people who love them, without those people using money as leverage against each other. I rose from the table, my meal half finished. Thank you for lunch, but I think we've said what needed to be said. I hope you'll reflect on what kind of relationship you truly want with your family, one based on control or one based on love, because eventually, everyone recognizes the difference. As I walked out of the Palmer Club, leaving Robert and Helen, Harrington at their elegant table surrounded by all the trappings of wealth and influence, I felt a curious lightness. I had named the game they'd been playing for years, not just with me but with Jessica and Michael. Whether they would recognize the truth in my words remained to be seen, but I had finally spoken my piece with clarity and dignity. The real question now was what Jessica would do when she inevitably learned of this confrontation. Would she retreat back into the safety of the Harringtons' influence, unwilling to risk the lifestyle they provided? Or would she find the courage to stand independently, to forge a family dynamic based on genuine connection rather than conditional support? As I drove home, I realized that whatever happened next was largely out of my hands. I had established the trust funds, created an opening for reconciliation, and named the manipulative dynamics at play. Now it was up to Jessica to decide what kind of mother, daughter, and person she wanted to be, and what example she wanted to set for Emma and Noah about the true meaning of family. I expected the fallout from my lunch with the Harringtons to be immediate and dramatic. Perhaps an angry call from Jessica, or a coldly polite cancellation of our next family dinner. Instead, 3 days passed in unsettling silence. No messages, no calls, no indication of how my confrontation with Robert and Helen might have affected the fragile reconnection with my daughter and grandchildren. On the 4th day, I was tending to the climbing roses in my garden when a sleek, black SUV pulled into my driveway. Michael stepped out, alone and unannounced, a first in all the years I'd known him. He was dressed casually in jeans and a polo shirt, his usual polished appearance slightly rumpled, as if he'd had a long day. "Michael," I greeted him, setting aside my gardening shears. "This is unexpected." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "I was hoping we could talk. Do you have a few minutes?" "Of course," I replied, leading him to the small patio where wisteria-covered trellises provided afternoon shade. "Would you like some iced tea? I just made it fresh this morning." "That would be great, thank you." I brought out 2 glasses and settled across from him at the wrought iron table I'd splurged on when furnishing my new outdoor space. Michael looked around, taking in the carefully tended garden, the comfortable seating area, the wind chimes tinkling gently in the breeze. "You've created a beautiful home here," he observed. "It suits you." The compliment seemed genuine, without the condescension I'd grown accustomed to from the Harrington family circle. "Thank you. Gardening has become something of a passion since I retired. There's something deeply satisfying about nurturing things, watching them grow." Michael nodded, taking a long sip of tea before setting down his glass with deliberate care. "Robert told me about your lunch meeting." And there it was, the real purpose of his visit. I waited, allowing him to direct the conversation. "He claims you refuse to hear their reasonable concerns about family cohesion," Michael continued, his tone neutral but watchful. Helen was more colorful in her assessment. I smiled slightly. "I can imagine." "What I can't imagine," Michael said, leaning forward slightly, "is you walking out of the Palmer Club after telling them both they don't understand what love is. That must have been quite a scene." Was that admiration I detected in his voice? I couldn't be sure. "It wasn't my intention to create a scene," I replied honestly. "But when they made it clear they viewed their financial support of your family as leverage to control your relationships, including limiting my access to Emma and Noah, I felt I needed to speak plainly." Michael was silent for a long moment, staring out at my garden as if the blooming hydrangeas might offer some insight. "They've always been controlling," he finally said, his voice quieter than before. "My entire life has been a careful negotiation around their expectations and demands. When my mother died and Robert married Helen a year later, those demands only intensified." This glimpse into Michael's perspective surprised me. In all our years of distant, polite interaction, he'd never shared anything personal about his relationship with his father and stepmother. "Jessica doesn't see it that way," he continued. "To her, their involvement represents security, stability. Everything she felt was precarious in her childhood. Their influence, their connections, their financial support. It all symbolizes the certainty she craves." "While to you it represents something else?" I prompted gently. He met my gaze directly. "Conditional acceptance. Something I've lived with my entire life but hoped to spare my children from experiencing." The admission hung between us, unexpected and revelatory. I'd always viewed Michael as an extension of the Harringtons' influence, someone who benefited from and perpetuated their value system. It had never occurred to me that he might have his own complicated relationship with their controlling behavior. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair, in a gesture that seemed uncharacteristically vulnerable for someone usually so composed. "Because things are coming to a head, and I need to understand where you really stand. Not what Robert claims you said, or what Helen believes you're plotting, but your actual intentions toward Jessica and our children." I considered my response, carefully, sensing that this conversation was pivotal. "My intentions are simple, Michael. I want a relationship with my daughter and grandchildren based on love, not obligation or financial manipulation. I want Emma and Noah to know their heritage, not just the Harrington side, but the story of their mother's childhood, of my life, of the values that shaped us before designer labels and country club memberships entered the picture." "And the trust funds?" he asked directly. "Why establish them with conditions about maintaining contact?" "To ensure that as Emma and Noah grow up, they have the opportunity to know me," I explained. "Not to control them, but to prevent others from completely severing our connection." The contact conditions are minimal, monthly visits or calls. From age 10. Hardly an onerous requirement for accessing substantial funds for their education and early adult needs. Michael nodded slowly. And if Jessica and I were to negotiate different terms? This isn't a business deal, Michael, I said gently. It's family. I'm not interested in negotiating terms or conditions beyond what I've already established. The trust funds exist, regardless of how you and Jessica choose to include or exclude me going forward. My hope is for genuine reconnection, not a transactional arrangement. He studied me with new interest, as if seeing beyond the carefully constructed image he'd accepted for years. You're not what I expected, he admitted finally. What did you expect? A rueful smile crossed his face. Someone trying to buy her way back into our lives. Someone who'd use her unexpected wealth as leverage, the way Robert and Helen use theirs. That's not who I am, I said simply. Money doesn't change a person's character, Michael. It just gives them more freedom to express who they've always been. He considered this, then asked, "And what did you do with that freedom, Sarah? When you suddenly found yourself with millions instead of living paycheck to paycheck?" It was a perceptive question, one that went to the heart of what wealth meant to me versus what it meant to the Harringtons. I secured my future, I replied honestly. I bought a comfortable home. I retired from active bookkeeping to focus on things that bring me joy: gardening, photography, community volunteering. And yes, I established trust funds for my grandchildren, ensuring they'd have educational opportunities regardless of future circumstances. No extravagances? No revenge spending to show up those who looked down on you for years? I laughed, softly. Like what? A sports car I'd be terrified to drive? Designer clothes that would make me feel like I was playing dress-up? Exotic vacations where I'd feel out of place? That's not happiness to me, Michael. It never has been. Something in my answer seemed to resonate with him. He nodded slowly, then asked the question I sensed had been his true purpose all along. What happens now, after your confrontation with Robert and Helen? That depends largely on you and Jessica, I replied. Robert and Helen have made their position clear. They expect you to limit my involvement with the family or risk losing their financial support. I've made my position equally clear. I won't be manipulated or marginalized. The question is, where do you and Jessica stand? Michael stared into his empty glass, turning it slowly between his hands. Jessica is torn, he admitted. She loves you. She's always loved you, even when she was pushing you away. But she's terrified of disappointing Helen and Robert, of losing the security they represent. And you? I pressed gently. He met my gaze directly. I'm tired of living under their control. I've spent my entire career at Robert's firm, making the safe choices, accepting their guidance in everything from where we live to how we raise our children. The irony is, I'm actually good at what I do. I could have established myself independently years ago, but it was easier to accept their help, their connections, their ready-made path. His candor surprised me. This wasn't the polished, somewhat distant son-in-law I thought I knew. This was someone wrestling with his own authentic identity after years of compromise. What do you want, Michael? For yourself, for Jessica, for Emma and Noah? He was quiet for a long moment, considering. I want my children to grow up knowing they're loved unconditionally, not just when they meet certain expectations. I want them to value character over status, substance over appearance. I want Jessica to reconnect with the parts of herself she's buried trying to fit into Helen's world. He paused, then added softly, and I want to build a life that's truly ours, not one we've accepted out of convenience or fear. Those are worthy goals, I said. But they won't come without difficult choices. Like standing up to Robert and Helen? He asked. though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Like being willing to risk their disapproval. Yes. Like possibly having to adjust your lifestyle if they follow through on their threats to withdraw financial support. Michael's expression hardened slightly. They've already started. Robert called me into his office yesterday to inform me that they're reconsidering funding Emma's private school tuition for next year, given our apparent shift in family priorities. And the speed of their retaliation didn't surprise me, but the pettiness of targeting an 8-year-old's education did. I'm sorry to hear that, I said sincerely. Using the children as leverage is particularly troubling. It's clarifying. Actually, Michael replied with unexpected firmness. It confirms what I've suspected for years but didn't want to acknowledge. Their generosity has always been about control, not love. He stood suddenly, pacing across my small patio. I've been working on something for the past year, he confessed. A business plan for my own investment advisory firm, focusing on ethical investing and financial literacy for underserved communities. It's the work I've always wanted to do, but never had the courage to pursue while under Robert's thumb. It sounds meaningful, I said, genuinely impressed by this glimpse of passion I'd never seen in him before. What's stopping you? Fear, he admitted bluntly. Fear of failure. Fear of disappointing Jessica, who's grown accustomed to a certain lifestyle. Fear of not being able to provide for Emma and Noah the way Robert and Helen have. I understood those fears intimately. The terror of financial insecurity, of letting down those who depend on you. I'd lived with those fears as a constant companion during Jessica's childhood. But I also knew something about courage, about making difficult choices for the right reasons. Those are valid concerns, I acknowledged. But Michael, you have advantages I never had as a single mother struggling to make ends meet. You have education, experience, professional connections independent of Robert's influence. You have a partner in Jessica, assuming she supports your vision, and you have resources you didn't know about a few weeks ago. He looked at me questioningly. Meaning? If you and Jessica are truly committed to building an independent life, free from Robert and Helen's manipulation, I'd be willing to help. Not to buy your loyalty or affection, but to support a future where my grandchildren grow up in a family defined by authentic values rather than social climbing and conditional love. Michael stared at me, clearly taken aback by the offer. You'd invest in my new firm? If the business plan is sound, yes. Not as a gift, but as a legitimate investment with proper terms and expectations. I'd also consider helping with Emma's school tuition during the transition period, if Robert follows through on his threat to withdraw support. Why would you do that? He asked, genuine confusion in his voice. After how we've treated you. For years? Because family isn't about keeping score, Michael. It's about supporting each other through challenges and changes. It's what I tried to teach Jessica growing up. Though somewhere along the way, the lesson got lost under the Harringtons' influence. He shook his head slowly, as if trying to reconcile this offer with his preconceptions about me. I need to think about this and talk to Jessica. Of course, I agreed. This isn't a decision to make hastily, but I want you to know that there are options beyond continuing to submit to Robert and Helen's control or struggling financially on your own. As Michael prepared to leave, he paused at the garden gate. There's something else you should know, he said. Jessica hasn't canceled Friday dinner. Despite Robert and Helen's pressure, despite their threats about Emma's school tuition, she's insisted that you're still welcome in our home. She told Helen directly that her relationship with you is non-negotiable. The information warmed something. Deep within me, a spark of hope that my daughter was finding her way back to the values I'd tried to instill. Thank you for telling me that, I said softly. Emma's been practicing reading aloud, Michael added with a small smile. She wants to read to you from that book of stories you gave her, to show you how well she can do it. I'll look forward to it," I promised, my voice slightly husky with emotion. After Michael left, I sat in my garden for a long time, processing our conversation. It had revealed layers of complexity I hadn't anticipated. Michael's private resistance to the Harringtons' control, his suppressed ambitions, Jessica's quiet determination to maintain our reconnection despite pressure to cut me off again. The situation was evolving in ways I couldn't have predicted when I first established those trust funds as a way to secure my place in my grandchildren's lives. The next day brought another surprise. A text message from Jessica asking if I'd like to meet her and the children at Riverside Park that afternoon. No explanation, no context, just a simple invitation that would have been unthinkable just weeks ago. I arrived at the park to find Jessica sitting on a bench near the playground, watching Emma push Noah on the swings. She wore casual clothes, jeans, sneakers, a simple t-shirt, and her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked younger this way, more like the daughter I remembered before designer labels and country club manners had created an artificial distance between us. "Mom?" she greeted me, making room on the bench. "Thanks for coming on such short notice." "Of course," I replied, settling beside her. "Is everything all right?" She gazed at her children, a complex mixture of emotions crossing her face. "Michael told me about your conversation yesterday, about your offer to help with Emma's school tuition and possibly invest in his new business." I nodded, waiting for her reaction rather than justifying myself. "It's not what I expected from you," she admitted finally. "When I first learned about your money, about the trust funds, I thought that I was using financial leverage the way Robert and Helen do." I suggested gently when she hesitated. Jessica nodded, a flush of embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "It was easier to believe that than to acknowledge how unfairly we've treated you, how I've treated you." She turned to face me directly. "I'm sorry, Mom. Not just for the recent exclusions, but for years of pushing you to the sidelines of our lives. For being embarrassed by where I came from instead of proud of everything you sacrificed to give me opportunities." The simple, direct apology caught me off guard. I'd expected a gradual thawing, not this sudden crack in the ice. "What brought this on?" I asked softly. "Emma?" Jessica replied with a sad smile. "After you left on Friday, she asked me why we don't see you more often. She said you tell better stories than anyone, and you know things about me that even I've forgotten. Then she asked if I was ashamed of you, because she overheard Helen telling Robert that I'd outgrown my origins." I winced at the callousness of Helen's assessment, but more importantly, at the realization that Emma had absorbed it. "What did you tell her?" "The truth," Jessica said firmly, "that I've been foolish and ungrateful, that you're one of the strongest, most loving people I know, and that she and Noah are lucky to have you as their grandmother." Her voice caught slightly. "That I'm lucky to have you as my mother, even though I haven't acted like it for a long time." Emma spotted us then, waving enthusiastically from the swings. "Grandmother Sarah, you came!" She hopped off her swing and raced toward us, Noah trailing behind her. "Can we show her, Mommy? Can we show her now?" Jessica nodded, reaching into her tote bag to pull out a large envelope. "The children have something for you," she explained as Emma and Noah crowded onto the bench between us. "We made it ourselves," Emma announced proudly as Noah nodded vigorously in agreement. I opened the envelope to find a handmade card decorated with colorful drawings of butterflies and flowers. Inside, in Emma's careful printing, were the words, "Family Tree Project," above a beautifully illustrated tree with photographs and names carefully attached to each branch. "It's for school," Emma explained eagerly. "We have to make a family tree showing all our important people. Mommy helped us find pictures of everyone." I studied the tree with growing emotion. At the top were Emma and Noah, below them, Jessica and Michael. Then, branching equally on either side, were the grandparents, Robert and Helen on one side and me on the other. My photograph wasn't a recent one, but a picture Jessica must have kept from years ago, showing me at about 40, smiling at the camera with unguarded joy. "We put you in a special place," Emma pointed out, indicating how my branch of the tree had been decorated with extra flourishes of silver glitter. "Because you're our special grandmother who tells stories and knows what Mommy was like when she was little like me. And you're going to teach me to build a fort," Noah added seriously, pointing to a small drawing of what appeared to be a structure made of blankets and chairs. I traced their careful work with gentle fingers, too moved to speak immediately. This wasn't just a school project. It was a declaration. Jessica had helped them create a visual representation of family that placed me on equal footing with the Harringtons, that acknowledged my rightful place in their lives. "Do you like it?" Emma asked anxiously when I remained silent. "I love it," I assured her, finding my voice at last. "It's the most beautiful gift I've ever received." "We made a copy for our wall at home, too," Jessica added quietly, "and one for Emma to take to school for her presentation next week." The significance of this wasn't lost on me. Jessica was publicly acknowledging me as an equal grandparent to her children, knowing that Emma's teacher, classmates, and undoubtedly other parents would see it. In their social circle, where the Harringtons' influence was considerable, this represented a meaningful statement of independence. "Mommy said you might come to my presentation," Emma ventured hopefully. "It's next Thursday at 2 o'clock. We're supposed to bring a grandparent to tell stories about our family history." I glanced at Jessica, seeking confirmation. She nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "We thought you might have some interesting perspectives to share. About resilience, about working hard for what matters, about the kinds of wealth that can't be measured in dollars." "I'd be honored," I told Emma, then looked back at Jessica. "Are you sure?" Helen might have expected to be asked. Jessica's expression hardened slightly. "Helen is not their only grandmother, and after what she said about you, about our origins, I think it's important for Emma and Noah to hear a different perspective on what family and success really mean." We spent the next hour at the park, the children alternating between playing on the equipment and returning to share discoveries or seek approval. Jessica and I talked more openly than we had in years, about her conflicted feelings regarding the Harringtons' influence, about Michael's dreams of starting his own firm, about her own buried desires to return to teaching, a career she'd abandoned, when marrying into the Harrington family made it seem unnecessary, even inappropriate. "I used to love working with children," she confessed. "The year I taught second grade before meeting Michael was exhausting but so fulfilling. Helen never understood why I'd want to waste my education on such modest ambitions, as she put it." "Do you miss it?" I asked. Jessica watched Emma helping Noah navigate the monkey bars, her expression wistful. "More than I've admitted, even to myself, especially now that Noah will be in kindergarten next year. I've been thinking about going back, maybe part-time at first." "Have you mentioned this to Michael?" She nodded. "Last night, after he told me about your conversation. We stayed up talking until almost dawn. Really talking about what we want our lives to look like, about the kind of parents we want to be. It was like something broke open between us, this honesty we've been suppressing for years while trying to meet Robert and Helen's expectations." "And what conclusions did you reach?" I asked gently. Jessica took a deep breath. "That we want to live more authentically, that we're willing to adjust our lifestyle if it means more freedom from the Harringtons' control, that we want Emma and Noah to value character over status, to understand that true worth isn't measured by country club memberships or designer labels." She looked at me directly. "All the things you tried to teach me that I rejected when I thought the Harringtons' world was superior." The admission hung between us, weighted with years of misunderstanding and missed connection. But rather than focusing on past hurts, I chose to embrace the opening toward future healing. "It's never too late to recalibrate," I said softly. To realign with your true values. Even if it means standing up to Robert and Helen? Jessica asked, echoing Michael's question from the day before. Even if it means risking their disapproval, their withdrawal of financial support? Especially then, I replied, because that's when you discover what you truly value, what you're willing to sacrifice for, what kind of example you want to set for Emma and Noah. Jessica was quiet for a moment, watching her children play. Then she said, Robert called this morning. He informed me that they've decided not to fund Emma's private school tuition next year after all. He framed it as encouraging more independence, but the timing makes the real message clear. How do you feel about that? I asked, careful not to immediately jump in with offers of financial assistance despite my conversation with Michael. Relieved, strangely enough, Jessica admitted. It clarifies things, forces us to make choices based on our priorities rather than defaulting to what's easiest or most familiar. Michael and I talked about options, public school, which is actually excellent in our district, or finding a way to continue with private education if that seems best for Emma. And what about Michael's business idea? His dream of starting his own firm? Jessica smiled, a genuine expression that lit up her face. He showed me his business plan last night. It's brilliant, Mom. Truly innovative in how it approaches ethical investing and financial education. He's been working on it secretly for over a year, refining every detail while feeling like it could never be more than a fantasy. But now, I prompted, now we're seriously discussing how to make it happen, the practical challenges, the financial realities, the leap of faith required. She hesitated, then added, Michael mentioned your offer to potentially invest to help with Emma's tuition during the transition. I nodded, waiting for her to continue. Part of me wants to say no immediately, Jessica confessed, to prove we can do this on our own, that we're not just trading Robert and Helen's financial support for yours. But that would be pride talking, not wisdom. There's a fundamental difference, I pointed out gently. Robert and Helen use money as leverage to control your choices, your relationships, your values. I'm offering support to help you establish independence from that control, to build a life aligned with your authentic priorities. No strings, no expectations of compliance or deference in return. Jessica considered this, then said quietly, We'd need to formalize any business investment properly. Michael insists on that. No favoritism, no special treatment, just fair terms that would apply to any investor. I wouldn't have it any other way, I assured her. As for Emma's school tuition, she continued, we might take you up on temporary help while we're transitioning. But only as a bridge, not a permanent arrangement. We need to establish sustainability on our own terms. Her thoughtful approach, prioritizing independence while being practical about interim support, impressed me. This was the daughter I'd raised, resourceful, dignified, clear-eyed about challenges without being too proud to accept help when it served a greater purpose. Whatever you decide, I support you, I told her sincerely. My only wish is to be part of your lives in a meaningful way. Everything else is negotiable. Emma and Noah raced back to our bench then, flushed with exertion and bubbling with excitement about a puppy they'd spotted on the playground. As Jessica helped Noah drink from his water bottle and Emma chattered about possibly getting a dog someday, Helen says they're too messy, but Daddy thinks they teach responsibility. I observed the four of them together, my daughter, her, children, this family that was cautiously welcoming me back into its heart. The trust funds that had initially been my way of securing a place in my grandchildren's lives had catalyzed something I hadn't fully anticipated. Not just my reconnection with Emma and Noah, but Jessica's reconnection with her authentic self. By standing firm against the Harringtons' manipulation, by offering support without control, I'd created space for Jessica and Michael to reconsider what kind of family they truly wanted to build. As we prepared to leave the park, Emma slipped, her small hand into mine. "Grandmother Sarah, will you still come for dinner on Friday? I practiced reading The Secret Garden just for you." "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I promised, squeezing her hand gently. Jessica met my eyes over Emma's head, her expression conveying what words couldn't fully capture. Gratitude, apology, hope for the future we might build together. Not a perfect future, certainly. The Harringtons wouldn't easily surrender their influence. There would be missteps and tensions as we all adjusted to new boundaries and expectations. Michael's business venture might face challenges. Jessica's return to teaching might prove more complicated than anticipated. But for the first time in years, I felt like we were facing these uncertainties together, as a family connected by more than obligation or financial considerations. The walls that had kept me at a distance were crumbling, not because of the trust funds themselves, but because of the truths they had forced into the open. As I drove home, I thought about Emma's family tree project, how carefully she had placed me on equal footing with the Harringtons, how proudly she had decorated my branch with silver glitter. In her innocent wisdom, she had recognized what the adults around her were still struggling to fully embrace. That family isn't defined by wealth or status or social connections, but by love that remains steadfast, even when tested. The college. Funds I'd established for my grandchildren had been a strategic move to ensure my place in their lives. But the true gift had been unexpected. The opportunity for all of us to rediscover what family really means, beyond the narrow definitions imposed by those who mistake control for love and conformity for connection. 6 months can change everything. As I sat in the audience at Emma's elementary school graduation ceremony, watching my granddaughter accept her 5th grade completion certificate with a confident smile, I marveled at how profoundly our family had transformed since that painful text message excluding me from her birthday party. Emma spotted me in the crowd and waved enthusiastically before rejoining her classmates. Beside me, Jessica squeezed my hand, a small gesture of connection that had become wonderfully commonplace. On my other side, Noah fidgeted in his dress, shirt, quietly looking through the butterfly identification book we'd purchased together during our weekly nature walks. Michael sat next to Jessica, his expression relaxed in a way I'd never seen during the years he'd operated under Robert's shadow. The Harringtons were notably absent. Their response to Jessica and Michael's declaration of independence had been swift and predictable. Financial withdrawal, social coldness, and finally, when those tactics failed to bring compliance, a kind of resigned detachment. They still saw Emma and Noah monthly, but on Jessica and Michael's terms, without the controlling influence that had once defined their relationship. Emma's private school education had continued, funded through a combination of scholarship, Michael's growing business success, and my temporary assistance. But the true wealth in her life had nothing to do with tuition. It was the authenticity she witnessed daily as her parents built a life aligned with their actual values rather than externally imposed expectations. After the ceremony, we gathered in the school courtyard where families mingled among refreshment tables. Emma ran toward us, her graduation certificate clutched proudly in one hand. "Did you see me, Grandma Sarah? I didn't trip on the stairs, like I was worried about. You were perfect," I assured her, embracing her warmly. The evolution from the formal Grandmother Sarah to the more affectionate Grandma Sarah had happened naturally over months of regular contact, weekly dinners, weekend outings, impromptu visits that were no longer carefully orchestrated exceptions, but normal parts of our family rhythm. "Are we still going to the Science Center tomorrow to celebrate?" she asked eagerly. "Noah wants to see the butterfly pavilion again." "Absolutely," Jessica confirmed. "Grandma Sarah already bought the tickets, and afterward we thought we'd visit Dad at his new office for lunch." Michael's independent investment firm had become a reality, launching 3 months earlier with a carefully selected group of clients who shared his vision for ethical wealth management. My investment had been formalized with proper terms, as Jessica had insisted, but the real return wasn't financial. It was witnessing Michael's transformation from Robert's deferential employee to a passionate entrepreneur driven by his own values. Jessica, too, had reclaimed parts of herself long suppressed under the Harringtons' influence. She'd returned to teaching part-time, accepting a position at a community center helping immigrant children improve their English skills. The designer, clothes had largely disappeared from her wardrobe, replaced by comfortable, practical attire, more suited to classroom activities and playground supervision. The country club membership had lapsed, replaced by family hiking trips and community volunteer projects. Most importantly, Emma and Noah were flourishing in an environment where authenticity was valued over appearances, where their relationships with all family members were based on genuine connection rather than obligation or social expectation. The trust funds remained securely established for their future education, but they represented just one dimension of the legacy I hoped to leave them, a legacy of resilience, integrity, and unconditional love. As we prepared to leave the graduation ceremony, I noticed Jessica checking her phone with a slight frown. "Everything okay?" I asked. She hesitated, then showed me the screen, a text message from Helen. "Congratulations to Emma. Please let her know her other grandparents are thinking of her today." "They were invited," Jessica said quietly. I made sure of it, despite everything. It was Emma's special day. "Some bridges take longer to rebuild than others," I replied gently. "You've done what you can by keeping the door open." Jessica nodded, putting away her phone. "I learned that from you, Mom. That family isn't about keeping score or holding grudges. It's about creating space for people to find their way back when they're ready." As we walked to our cars, Emma skipping ahead with Noah, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. What had begun as a pragmatic strategy to secure my place in my grandchildren's lives, college funds with conditions about maintaining contact, had catalyzed something far more valuable, the reclamation of authentic family bonds that no amount of money could buy or control. The trust funds still mattered, of course. They would provide Emma and Noah with educational opportunities and early adult support that might otherwise have been compromised by their parents' brave decision to step away from the Harringtons' financial influence. But the true gift wasn't monetary at all. It was the daily presence of a grandmother who told stories about their mother's childhood, who taught them to identify butterflies and build backyard forts, who showed them through example that wealth isn't measured by bank balances or social connections, but by the courage to live authentically and love unconditionally. As Emma turned to wave me toward the ice cream shop where we'd planned our post-graduation celebration, her face alight with simple joy, I knew that my own wealth had nothing to do with the financial windfall that had changed my circumstances. My true riches were right here, in recovered relationships, in Sunday dinners filled with laughter, in the small hand that reached confidently for mine, secure in the knowledge that some connections, once restored, can never truly be broken again. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.